my distinct honor on behalf of the National Writing Project to kick off today's spring meeting plenary. Do Now, a Twitter-based project conceived of by Matt Williams, who's here and sitting down, who's here with us today and is the educational technologist at KQED, the Bay Area's award-winning public media affiliate. Helps youth engage in civic and civil conversations across geographic and socioeconomic boundaries about issues and events in the news. And that feels like the exact right topic for a session here in our nation's capital, where it sometimes feels as if polemics rather than informed dialogue is the order of the day. We at the National Writing Project, through our Educator Innovator Initiative, that's educatorinnovator.org, recognize the potential of putting into youth's hands not just new media tools of communication and civic action, but also the knowledge and experience to make reasoned arguments about today's burning social and political issues, and to be critical, respectful responders to the arguments of others. To that end, we've supported this effort and the work of Do Now engaged writing project teachers, including those here with us today, who will be helping us understand and even experience the affordances of this exciting new practice. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Janelle Dentz of the North Star of Texas Writing Project. Minu Rami of the Philadelphia Writing Project. Chris Sloan of the Wasatch Range Writing Project. And of course, Matt Williams. So Matt.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Elise, and the National Writing Project team. This is really exciting to be here and be able to present in front of such an awesome crowd and share with you this great project, Do Now. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a forecast into this time, this 3-hour session, we're going to be first beginning with a little right into the session activity. You guys will have about 15 minutes to kind of think about a big idea and discuss amongst yourselves. And then I'm going to go into an overview of KQED Do Now, and what it is, and how it works, and how it perhaps can add value to learning. And then we're going to go into an examination of Do Now and student work, where you all will have a chance to practice and reflect on participation with the activity. Then we'll have a little break, about a 10-minute break. And then we'll jump into a panel discussion with Chris, me, and Janelle, sharing their reflections and practice and pedagogical practice into how Do Now is kind of helping to improve their learning goals or add to their learning goals in their class. And then I'll be going over a little bit of Do Now and how the types of challenges and ideas that that an educator would need to consider before implementing, and what types of things you might want to think about. And then we'll be closing up with that. So we have a lot to unpack in these 3 hours. I'm really excited to present to you guys. And I also was a middle school language arts teacher. Many years ago. So we're going to start today with this question of what is the value of social media for learning? And it would be great if you all could, if there's some notes, notepads, paper, or on your computers, if you want to sort of spend some time to think about this. Where do you fall into this spectrum, perhaps, of currently with social media and learning? And then once you've done that, find a partner next to you and share out your ideas and thoughts. We'll spend about 10 minutes on this form of activity. So, I just want to, we can't really get into time with sort of seeing where everyone is at, but just to kind of get a temperature of the room, I like to do a little polling and see how many, raise your hand if you feel like social media has no place for learning. How about some value? Raise your hand if you feel like there's some value in social media and learning. And how about there's quite a bit of value in social media learning? So this is not what Congress is like. So that's excellent. So hopefully this presentation, this will give you a great vehicle for implementing those beliefs. So just to kind of step back a second, So I work at KQED. That's basically. I work at KQED, which is the public media station in the Bay Area. We're the NPR PBS affiliate, and we focus on providing content about science, arts, and news. And we have a whole education wing that produces media and trains teachers on our free media resources that we create in science, arts, and news and civics, with a specific emphasis on media literacy and new media literacies. So with that framing, we about 2 years ago developed this project, Do Now, which is a weekly post on our website that we publish for students all over the country to debate and get into a whole conversation about current issues using Twitter and other social media platforms. And the goal of this project is to build civic engagement and digital literacy skills. And within digital literacy, you can even unpack that a little bit more and really sort of emphasize new media literacy skills and getting young people to really build media arguments with these amazing tools that are out there and to converse about those arguments, and Twitter being a great platform to do that. So we started this project, like I said, 2 years ago in a school in San Francisco, a high school, and to sort of see if this was something that kids would be engaged with, if there's actually learning, or is it sort of gimmicky, and kind of just to get a sense of it. And it was overwhelmingly positive in terms of the results of students' interest and their just interest in learning and passion about topics. So this video, I wanted to just sort of show you, contextualizes where we were 2 years ago. We went to the school, the Burton High School, interviewed students and their teacher, and they kind of really show you what that experience was like.
From KQED Public Radio in San Francisco, I'm Michael Krasny. Good morning and welcome to this morning's forum program. Yesterday, the United States Supreme Court concluded 3 consecutive days of hearings on the Affordable Health Care Act, which became law under the Obama administration.
The school district and the No Child Left Behind Act wanted teachers across the board to have a do now at the beginning of class so that kids would have something immediately to sit down and do. So we do it every day, but on Fridays we work with KQED on the do now on Twitter. And it's been a wonderful experience. As you may or may not know, most times kids are told to put their cell phones away or they're taken away. They can take them out at lunch, after school, but they're never really used in the classroom. When we first started the project, Matt Williams from KQED had to bring in a whole cart of laptops because the administration said absolutely no, you may not take out the cell phones. So after a while, we were back and forth with the administration on this. We found in the student handbook with San Francisco Unified School District that, in fact, if a teacher approves of using mobile devices for a learning experience, it's perfectly legal.
It was cool using technology as an educational thing. It just seemed more fun than writing on paper.
It was really interactive. It wasn't a boring class anymore.
The students responded really well. At the beginning, it seemed to be they were kind of throwing themselves behind a fight against authority. Like, we should be able to use our devices in the classroom. We used them anyway, and I agreed with them. And I felt that they weren't ever given the opportunity to use it in a really positive, educational way. We were very, very happy to pioneer this project at Burton High School.
We would get our phones out and we would see a prompt on the internet, on the KQED website, and it would give us a question, about the topics of the week, and we would answer it.
I think the topics were well chosen. It could be science, art, politics. They would come to me and say, "What's the topic this week?"
The topics were mostly social problems. They varied week to week. They actually taught me a lot. I liked them.
One topic I thought was interesting was when people were talking about Trayvon Martin and how people felt about it.
9/11, affordable housing in our community.
Are we spending on the things that we should be spending on? Important stuff. Are we thinking about others what they need?
Like healthcare for people and how people are losing it.
Or sometimes they ask us about what would you do to change the world? Questions like that. these issues in their everyday lives.
I felt that the prompts were really helpful to me as a teacher because I didn't necessarily have to create the lesson. It was already there and very well done. It would often have a media piece with it where the kids could watch a video clip or listen to some audio. The first time we did it, it was on the topic of 9/11. And when they saw it actually going up on the feed, they get all excited and actually kind of tweet themselves because they saw their response live and other kids would respond to it. And then we started getting feedback from around the world, and that just really kind of hit home with them, that they were part of a global community, they felt connected. It gave them a really big thrill and a sense of empowerment, I think.
Our teacher, she had a projector up there and with a screen, and we saw our tweets pop up.
It made me feel like I was part of some community, able to share their thoughts.
I like the fact that we could get our opinion out and people would actually read it.
I think with the use of Twitter in this instance, I think it does show them the power of social media in being active in changing the world. At the same time they were doing this, there were several instances of social media being used in the news, and the kids were like, yeah, we can do that too.
I feel like social media can bring justice.
I do feel like it's important that the youth do know how to use Twitter because it is what's coming up in our world today. Technology keeps growing and growing every day.
If you do it on Twitter, you just type how you feel and just get straight to the point, and people understand it.
I just want to really thank Matt Williams for making this happen. Without him, this would have been...
So that was like 2 years ago, and flash forward to now, and students are debating across the country on Twitter about these issues, and it's really been successful and exciting to see the impact. So to sort of show you what that looks like, last spring we did a topic on immigration reform, and so students, we asked the question, students chimed in on Twitter, and we got a variety of different kinds of responses. This one is an example of just like a simple opinion. Student wrote, I think anyone without a criminal record should be eligible for citizenship. Students also posted these great digital stories, a poem about immigration. This is actually one of Janelle's students. Sort of using media, multimedia and digital tools to come up with an argument and then tweet the link to that media. And then we also got some interesting responses where students were more in this dialogue, into sort of this critical discourse. This is an example of students talking about we put up a citizenship test, and they took it and kind of went through the process of whether this was a valid kind of process, validity of the test itself. And so one student wrote, I got 6 questions right for the citizenship test. You shouldn't decide a good citizen because knowing this won't help USA. And then School to School wrote, I totally agree this shouldn't decide whether you should be a citizen. Then Pamela wrote, I agree not every person who was born here knows America's history yet they're still citizens. And then Amanda wrote, but you all said people need to know honor rights, laws, customs, how else to show this is known. So this is more the direction we're hoping students get to is this more critical discourse where the conversation starts at a certain place and it can move and it really opens this type of critical thinking. So when students go on to Do Now, they go to kqed.org/DoNow, and every post has the same exact structure. It starts with a question. So for the citizenship, the immigration reform post, it was who should be considered for a path to citizenship? Do you agree with the proposed immigration reform bill? What is a fair, equitable approach? Then we always provide an introduction that kind of contextualizes the issue, kind of talks about how we got to this point in time that it's now brought up in the news. And then we have a media resource that we embed that's the sort of news story. It's usually a PBS NewsHour video, or it's an NPR radio story, or some kind of media resource that really sort of represents the issue well. Then students tweet in their conversation. They also can use our website's comment section to talk about it this way, to keep the really to make the platform or the Do Now activity accessible and flexible to the needs of teachers in the school community and issues with access and so forth. Students can also just, take the prompt and just have a discussion in class without using social media or the webs. So the question then is, how does Do Now add value to learning? And this thinking beyond the fact that you can tweet and see your tweet on the Do Now feed and the sort of gimmicky. Where's the real value to this? And there's a lot, and we'll talk more about this as we go through the panel, but my two main reasons that I like to sort of note are this new cultural landscape that we live in and Common Core. And those aren't necessarily separate, I think they're all kind of combined as one. But when we think of the new cultural landscape, I refer to this idea of Web 2.0, that the world shifted quite drastically in around 2005, 2006, where anyone with an internet connection could have access to published media that could be seen by millions of people. And Henry Jenkins, professor at USC, coined this participatory culture. And so this is a major paradigm shift that happened. Back when we were young, or maybe this is a little bit before I was young, but media used to be 3 channels and radio. And there was a one-to-many model where everyone accessed information from only a few, one type of source. And now with the democratization of media, it's this new cultural landscape, the many-to-many model where there's all these different websites like YouTube and Twitter and blogs and so forth where you can post and things can go viral real fast. So with this new cultural landscape, students have new needs in this new era. And we as educators, I think, are in a great sort of place to kind of help be that bridge to those needs. And a typical student kind of looks like this. We all know that our students are incredible at multitasking and taking out their phones and eating and doing many things at once. But tech savvy does not necessarily mean that they're digitally literate. And again, this is an opportunity to really sort of take what they're already interested in and give it some agency and develop their skills to voice and provide in the context of what's being discussed. So the second reason is Common Core. And basically Common Core has this framework that really just embraces writing. Reading, research, like the standard here in technology standards for history and social studies, using technology, including the internet, to produce, publish, and interact, collaborate with others. So that's the writing aspect. I'm not sure why it's standard 6, it should be after. Standard 8 being gathering relevant information from multiple print and digital sources and assessing the credibility and accuracy of each source. So this whole research and writing process, I think with Do Now, it really lends itself to these, developing these standards. And so with that, we're trying to build this process, this writing process that can start with commenting on a website and escalates to producing your own media, and sort of there's different sort of moments in between that students can gain and sort of learning the process of reading, evaluating, assessing, creating, publishing, and then sort of the discourse. And so the way Do Now kind of works is, the prompt goes up, you read and analyze the intro, the media resource, the question, much like when you're doing any kind of writing. You evaluate perhaps student responses to the conversation. You research the topic and how it perhaps affects you locally. This idea of a national issue being distilled and framed through the local lens, which is a real opportunity for students in a variety of, in their own area to then have a national conversation. Then brainstorming an argument with references to selecting a media format that best conveys your argument. So the tool is sort of the Marshall McLuhan, the the medium is the message. That's the best way to present that. Creating the argument, to then publishing and tweeting the link to that argument, and thinking about how can you leverage Twitter to get your message out there even further, considering issue like mentioning symbols and hashtags and so forth. Got cut off a little bit. Let's get the idea out there. It says. You can see. And then this part gets lost, but sometimes in just general writing is this idea of replying to others, conveying the idea, debating discourse. You reply back to students who've made media, and then you have this conversation where the media piece of one of the entry points to the conversation. So this whole process really, I think, it's the Common Core is really sort of embedded in this process. So back to this building civic discourse using multimedia tools is that we really want to emphasize this idea of developing your own media argumentation and then replying to others who've made those and getting into this deeper conversation. That Twitter, even though it is 140 characters and that is limiting, you can actually link to media that you've created, to sources that you reference, and the argument can be much bigger than 140 characters. So last spring, we partnered with the National Writing Project and a few senators, a few teachers from the National Writing Project to kind of think about that idea of media argumentation with Do Now. Because before that point, it was really was just Twitter and the 140 characters, maybe a link to a source that helped as evidence. But we didn't really see how this could work. So Janelle and Chris could really talk about that more. But as we did that project, we realized that there was just a great opportunity to also develop these great media resources like these video tutorials to show how to use all these digital tools and web production tools that are free for students to create. Like how to use an interactive timeline, how to create an interactive timeline, or an infographic, or Popcorn Maker, which is an online editing system. So there's all these great ways that are free and easy to aggregate media, create the media, find the link, and then tweet that link out. And then once students started making media to convey the arguments, we started putting together these Do Now roundups, which curate the conversation, and we post that on our website, what students are thinking about these issues, and we sort of show the whole spectrum of student voice. This was a meme that a student created about crime in their community and the role of police. So I'm just going to take you to the website, just kind of show you a little bit, give you a little tour. So on the Do Now website, you have the main post, the most recent post. This was for our arts and pop culture. And then we have our different subjects. We have civics. The most recent civics one is about minimum wage, which we'll get into later today. One about science and arts. And then underneath there's the Do Now roundup. And our digital tools. And so if you go to the digital tools section, you see that there's all these video tutorials that you can jump right in and show your students, how to make dynamic video experiences with Popcorn Maker, or how to use Poplit, or Mixbit, Time Toast, which is an interactive timeline, Padlet. So all these videos are like 5 to maybe on the longer side, some of them are 10 minutes. And they're just great introductions to how to use it. We also have more robust tutorials like iMovie, which is like a 9-part series, or Audacity, which is a great free sound editing program. So those are available as well. And then the roundups are, just basically we take the most popular idea and make that the title, and then just embed students' tweets. So we had one arts, the best songs represent the good times we've shared. We had a do now about students deconstructing song lyrics and identifying what songs are the most meaningful to them. And then we embed their tweets that kind of talk about it. So many students pointed to songs that remind them of an experience or a person. And so someone talked about John Lennon, and so you can sort of see where the students' voices are in this interview. It's quite interesting to see that. So now we're at spring 2014, and we have over 150 schools around the nation participating in this project, which is really exciting. So I think we're going to move on. Janelle's going to come up and talk about the examination of Janelle.
All right, so every week, as he says, there's at least one question, or there could be several questions that the learners can actually decide. There's a great introductory piece. And so right now we're going to kind of watch the video here. So you guys will have some context and to actually participate and do what our learners or students do. So I would invite my kids to do all of the background reading and the video watching earlier in the week, and then as the week progresses, we actually will start responding.
The Congressional Budget Office, by definition, is considered a nonpartisan agency. But the report it released yesterday about the effects of raising the minimum wage was seized upon by both sides of the debate. Among its findings, if the minimum wage were raised to $10.10 an hour, it could eliminate 500,000 jobs. But it would also lift 900,000 families out of poverty and raise incomes for more than 16 million people. The report noted there could be significant variation in the numbers. We joined the debate with Thea Lee. She's the Deputy Chief of Staff at the AFL-CIO. And David Newmark. He's an economist at the University of California, Irvine. He's done extensive work on this subject. And we welcome you both to the program. Thea Lee, to you first, what is your main takeaway here? That on one hand, the Congressional Budget Office is saying, yes, it lifts people out of poverty, it'll raise incomes, but it has the potential to eliminate 500,000 jobs.
Well, there were some good findings out of the CBO study. As you said, 16.5 million people getting a pay increase, which is long overdue, and about 900,000 coming out of poverty. The most controversial finding in the CBO study was that up to 500,000 people could lose their jobs because of hiking the minimum wage. But if you look carefully at the CBO study, they haven't actually done new research. And I think it was a little bit biased in the sense that they gave a lot more weight to studies that might have a negative employment impact and less weight to a vast consensus among economists right now that in fact raising the minimum wage will have little or no adverse job impact. And I think those studies have been more of the newer studies, more careful studies that have been done, and that's where a lot of the economics profession is right now.
Professor Newmark, what is your takeaway on what the CBO said, and how do you respond to what Thea Lee just said, that it really didn't take into account the consensus of economists? She said that there won't be this effect on jobs.
Well, let me take the first question in reverse. Let me take the question in reverse order. It's simply a misstatement of the research evidence to say that most studies point to no effects of minimum wages on employment. To say that there's a consensus among economists now, I don't know where that comes from. There's survey. I did an extensive survey of minimum wage studies back in 2007 with co-author William Washer at the Federal Reserve Board. We found that while there's definitely a dispute here, most of the evidence, 2/3 of the studies and a higher percentage of the studies we think are better, point to negative minimum wage effects. There are a few recent studies that find the opposite. That's not new. There have always been a few studies that find to the contrary. There's been a rather concerted effort by, I'd say, the authors of those studies, as well as some people very in favor of raising the minimum wage, to make it seem as if that's what we know now and that's the consensus, but that's simply not the weight of the evidence. I really welcome the CBO study because I think what it does is it puts the discussion back where it should be. There are costs to raising the minimum wage. There are some benefits to raising the minimum wage. We should be having an informed policy discussion about what those costs and benefits are and how we trade them off against each other. The discussion and arguing as if there's no cost, no disemployment effects to the minimum wage, obviously if there's no cost, it's all benefits, you might as well do it, and you might as well keep doing it higher and higher. So I think the CBO study puts us back where we need to be, saying there is some job loss, and let's think about that cost relative to the benefits.
Theo.
All right, obviously I'd let my kids watch the whole thing. But isn't that goodness right there? I mean, it really offers an unbiased opinion, but I like this piece especially because they do go back and forth and say, well, you can say that or you can say this, and it really teaches our kids to look at data and look at evidence and look at sources critically. And now we're moving towards that really important critical engagement and how can we get them to be responsible digital citizens. All right. All right, so now we're going to ask you all, and I'm sorry I didn't ask you to take notes, but you guys can always revert back to the Do Now site, and if you could just jot down your response to the question, just as our kids would, how much should minimum wage be in your area? And after you jot down the response, we're going to ask you guys to share it with an elbow partner. All right, so we were asked to post the link of the presentation again. So there it is, but we're going to have to go on. My kids would automatically take a picture of it so they can remember it. So just a tip. So there it is, because it's going. Now we got to find our place. Oh yeah, and it was also tweeted. So now that you've gotten your response, and you have shared it with your elbow partner, really quickly, how did this interaction with your partner influence your understanding of the concept or the topic of minimum wage in your area? Any thoughts on that? Yes?
One of my elbow partners had done some work in his class on it, so he had a lot of prior knowledge, and that kind of informed us in a way that I had thought about.
Great. Okay. So the benefits of hearing someone else's experience with the topic in the classroom?
Okay, my elbow partners, I'm from DC, and we have Texas and Mississippi. So clearly, we're going to have different needs in terms of minimum wage. And also how to deal with the possibilities of losing jobs. It seems to me that that's a challenge that every community is going to have to take on.
Great, so that's really interesting here because it is kind of a more national level of a meeting. You got not only how you were different, but also how you were connected. So, all right. How did you feel during this interaction, just sharing with someone close to you? I was like, is it this? Or 2 thumbs up, we feel good about it. Okay, so we're gonna take that same question, and now we're gonna involve the entire table, okay? So you can talk about things that you shared with your elbow partner, but now really involve everyone at the table, and let's see if that's similar, different, what the benefits are, what the disadvantages are. Of the topic. The entire table. Because hopefully you only shared with partner last time, I noticed. Yes?
It's just interesting to see how much variation there is in wages from state to state.
Great, so really a lot of variation. You got to benefit from the diversity of the table. Excellent. Any others? Yes? Yes, it added to the complexity of the issue. Excellent. Yes?
Tara really helped clarify my thinking. I was thinking it needs to be enough that a person can get by if they're working a full-time job, and she said, oh, that's called living wage. And there's a website on that. And so it really helped me with, I was trying to form my thoughts, and I wasn't quite sure what I was talking about, and then that interaction helped clarify greatly.
Excellent. So having that interaction and that intention and time to actually clarify your thinking and be able to articulate it with others. That's really important skill. All right. How did you feel in this interaction versus the elbow partners, but sharing out with a bigger group?
Okay.
I think we have a lot of extroverts, yes.
Every time you go from elbow partners to the whole group, it kicks up the requirements. You're asked to do more, have to listen more, have to integrate that more. So you're asking more of the time, which is
Excellent. You are asking more, and you all are so wonderful that you stepped up to the challenge. I actually did this with another group of teachers, and they were like, yeah, it allowed us to sit back and let the others talk. So, you know, you can be thinking that way too, but y'all are rock stars, so you continue. Yeah, okay, so very good. It kicked up the requirements or the expectations. You were kind of accountable to more people, and that's really good because you are actually maybe creating the sense of community right here at your table. Excellent. All right, we're gonna kick it up a notch. And now we're gonna ask you guys to articulate your thinking, represent and clarify your thinking on today's meet. So it'll be the same post, the same question, the same prompt. How much should minimum wage be in your area? But you can kind of base it now not only on the resources that you have had on the Do Now page, not only with the discussion that you've had with your partner, not only with the discussion you had on your table, you can do all of that and now respond please to the prompt on this today's meet. You guys can't see that there? todaysmeet.com/donowwages. So, yeah, we were talking about, it would be nice if we were able to see a reply in a threaded discussion like you can in Twitter or discussion board, but that's all right. All right, so thinking about the interaction that you just had now, you did your elbow partners, you did your table, and now you did today's meet, so you could talk to people across the room. How did that interaction influence your understanding of the topic? Yes?
We found out at our table that someone at another table had brought up a point that we hadn't even thought of about college work-study students and how much they make versus the minimum wage. Thanks, Judy. And so it was a point of view we hadn't been exposed to yet.
Excellent. So new perspectives, new points of view, because we're interacting with more people. Anything else? Yes?
We became really obsessed early on with more research that we wanted to do, and it was interesting that there were people posting, you know, towards links or studies that actually responded to the research questions we talked about before. So that was great.
Excellent. Yeah, it was really interesting to me, even though you weren't prompted to do so, because teaching freshmen, I do prompt them to say, hey, include resource, include evidence to back up your thesis or your response to the prompt. So here, naturally, because again, y'all are awesome, you guys actually posted research and links so people could reference those and see where you were getting your train of thought from. And then you even have access to more research on that topic.
I feel like there's something else that happens about selecting which one to read. Because there's so many happening all at once, you do go through a sort of process where you're looking for certain keywords. It's almost like doing a sort of mental Google search, where you're only looking for certain kinds of words and to decide what you're going to read, because you'll spend all of your time trying to deal with them.
Excellent. So you're kind of training your mind to do a different kind of reading, a different kind of search, but it's giving you another platform to do so with a very important topic. So.
I have a question about citing the information and maintaining the integrity of the original research, because students so easily cut and paste or post a link. And this came up at my school just this week. The statistics teacher said, how do we cite the information on an infographic? Is it parenthetical? How do we make the students acknowledge where they found their sources? And because in this digital age, students are having a very difficult time understanding what the whole idea of sourcing information is, because it's so accessible to just cut and paste. So how do you address that?
So we do ask our learners to always post the link. They can take screenshots, but we ask them to post the link where that source was found. And I think as we go on, you'll see there's more calling out of learners saying, hey, but you forgot, if you go on in that source, this is also mentioned. So if learners are taking bits and pieces to kind of their advantage, the interesting thing is, in this discourse, is that other learners are naturally picking up on that and they're saying, hey, but guess what? Your source also said this. Or here are 3 other sources that say the opposite. So they're critically defending and challenging their thoughts as well. And we're going to be showing examples of that later on. So, okay. All right. Was there a difference on what you posted in the Today's Meet versus what you actually said in your table talk or your elbow talk? Would you like to speak to that?
I think that, reading certain things just help me to clarify certain thoughts and rethink certain thoughts so that, it just filters into other things.
I like that idea of filtering because, again, since you're limited on the characters, you are filtering and fine-tuning and taking out words that may not be necessary in actually expressing your thought or ideas. Really distilling, that's what my kids say, they're distilling it to the essence of what their response is. Anything else on that? Yes?
I just loved how, the conversation jumped from this table to that table. And, I think that's what I love about Twitter, is the way it can jump, someone notices it. So.
How did you guys, yes?
I think the other thing I think is interesting is when you charge a whole room with thinking about something, how it shifts for the person in the front of the room to be able to think about what ideas they want to foreground as opposed to what student they might call on, right? And so instead of thinking about making sure you hear from a quiet table, it's like what idea is important to move this conversation further.
Excellent, excellent. How did you guys feel in this interaction? It was a closed, but it was still bigger. So how did you guys feel using Today's Meet?
I like the idea of the level playing field, that you can walk in and not be an expert, know enough to participate. So sometimes students shut down because they have nothing to say, no prior knowledge. But with the video and the info section and the discussion can actually involve everyone else.
Excellent, good. Yes?
We didn't have devices, so we couldn't participate. What do you do for that situation?
Yeah, then you get really creative with that.
Students all have devices and...
Yeah, we'll go into the context of that too. Yeah, I'm really fortunate all my kids have laptops. So.
Yeah, we don't have wireless in a lot of our schools.
Yeah.
All right. Yes?
I wondered if you had any discussion or any response to students about the character limit on the talk at today's meeting. Because I thought that if you had it done like we endeavored to today, you were building up knowledge over time. By the time you got this, you think participants might have more to say than the allowable characters. Do you ever have any sarcastic, and how does that impact students' ability to develop arguments in their so constrained with this non-characters?
Absolutely. And we're going to be discussing that also. What do you do with different platforms that have different limitations? And interestingly enough, our kids can really negotiate that easily, and they pick and choose. But Chris will speak to that a little bit later on. Yes.
I've been the entire year I've been dealing with, my classroom has gone to a one-to-one situation, so I've been trying to figure out how much of my class needs to take place face-to-face, how much of my discussion can happen online, and just comparing the level of discussion at our table to the, I'm not going to say superficial is too strong of a word, but I go through the posts, I kind of read and I kind of skim, etc. on Today's Meet, how important it is to bring it back face-to-face or to start face-to-face, because I think there's a greater richness to that level of conversation. So in the classroom, just coming back to that, okay, here's all this, let's chat about what's going on.
Absolutely. I think also though, and we'll talk about this too, as your students use these platforms more, they let the discussion get richer. And you'll see that with some future examples. I mean, there's some pretty serious talk happening online.
I'm sorry, really quickly, but the making piece is also a part of the discussion.
Yes.
So that's
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of making to it. Yeah.
And I just want to quickly just acknowledge the fact that there were not devices there, and so like apologies for engaging in this, without checking to see if everyone did have devices. And I would also say that I think one of the things that has been interesting in at least in my experience in trying to implement some of this work in schools has been the degree to which kids seem to bring with them, devices that they use. So I think referring back to the video that Matt showed, the degree to which kids in that context, are accessing their own mobile devices. So I think I wonder to what extent you have, or your kids have access to devices, in your school context, and then, how is it possible to advocate in the way that the teacher did, that Matt was showing in the video, for the ability to use those, to leverage those devices, those very powerful computing devices that they bring to school with them every day.
Well, we have to have a conversation that we need to use whatever broadband we have, which is very limited in our very rural, I'm from Virginia, but a very rural area. The mountains prevent even cell signals in most of our area. And our schools, when we have to do standardized testing, we can't be on any other internet. I had a student say it took me longer to log into my test than it took me to take it. And it's so slow. And when testing is going on, the students are not allowed to access any other web-based information in the school. So we really need to talk to administrators and school boards and educate them on the power of this platform and opening it up to learning experiences and putting more emphasis on this type of learning than using our broadband for testing.
I think the other thing that's important, because, everybody immediately feels for the group that said, hey, we didn't have devices, we couldn't participate. And I think it's interesting to notice that we're really talking about how we were able to hear from this whole room except a small group, and we really have to troubleshoot how we hear from 4 or 5 next time, as opposed to how this activity so often only listens to 4 or 5. And so the idea that we can sort of be innovative and think through how do we actually make sure that these folks have access and engage in this activity a different way. You can sort of think through and iterate it. But we're pretty darn close to hearing from every single person in a very short time.
Right. Yes.
And just to say, for anybody in the room that advocated for Connect Ed yesterday, Connect Ed is about trying to both provide connectivity everywhere at high-speed broadband power, one, and to provide the professional development that would let people spin that not toward testing only, but toward learning. So if you actually said that yesterday to your representatives, then you have assisted folks like folks over here in making the case for their connectivity broadband.
Yes.
I would like to say, and we all embrace the notion of stories and how much power they carry. And one story that I carry around in my head that I saw within the last month was a mother who's raising her 2 teenage sons in a homeless shelter who saved money to buy him a non-working cell phone because the appearance of having access is so critical in terms of how students relate to one another socially in school settings, that I think what we think we see and what we see could be 2 different things. And that one of the pieces of the NWP that so appeals to all of us is this continual focus on equity, access, and social justice. And so this is so powerful and so right and so good, and it just creates for us another layer to think through and say, how do we get access for those who don't have it, and how do we do it in such a way that they're not at all marginalized because they've got free access, or it's another free and reduced price lunch thing. Are you going to go without lunch so you don't have the stigma of having gotten it for free? There's another layer of complexity, I think, there for all of us, but I would never want it to get in the way of pursuing what I see as incredibly generative approaches to student civic engagement and literacy.
I'm sorry.
Just to add one other thing, in my observations of urban, rural, and suburban schools, I find a lot of suburban
paperless society and they're doing this kind of activity. I love doing undergrads field notes where kids are tweeting back and forth and trying to watch what's going on the whiteboard as they're tweeting back and forth and having conversations. And the teachers are proud, and I'm like, wow, this is great. But then I go into the urban schools where sometimes the kids have the technology, like they have the cell phones and everything, and they get suspended for pulling their cell phones. So there's a completely different,
I live that.
It's not only about wages, it's not only about wages, I like what she said, social justice and social equity, because like some of our kids in schools are punished for trying to be a part of society. And that's the thing that I want to be aware of as well.
That's a great point, yeah, absolutely. Yes?
I still see this as an excellent area because this does not remove the responsibilities of teachers. We were discussing in our group, it still teaches critical thinking. You have some skills, abstract. For me, one of the most favorite part of the writing process is revision because you can take something that is, one way and transform it into something completely different. This allows us to teach the children revision skills. So something like this with, closed Twitter account, you can take an account or a response. For example, you saw a word up there that brought up a whole discussion out at our table for working. And you can tailor that. You can teach the students, hey, if you want to reach a larger audience, you would have to rephrase. You would have to, construct your response to get to reach that. Because if you're going to offend me within the first 3 words, I'm not reading what you have to say. That's very, very important. I was just thinking when somebody spoke earlier about horn books, I think they're called slates. My goodness, I was doing something in English way back when you saw those little pieces of wood, and the children they felt I don't know, wealthy. They had something they could write on. Now take that and compare it just to paper. Many of you like, oh no, thank you. So we would not give it a C paper as an advantage, as something that we can work with, because everybody here, we have so many devices right here, when we couldn't get off, we're almost outraged. This is just opening my mind. I see, let me just a little bit. I had to do some research, something for an organization. I had to get my son up, and he was like, Mom, I'm so sick. I said, this is very important. This has to do with your scholarships and stuff. But these things have to be, the teachers have to take on, this whole platform, this whole knowledge. We have to embrace it. And as we were discussing, if it's something that you're not good at, well, I have given you the wealth of my knowledge. You give me yours. What is this LOL and KIG? So I'm very excited about it. And,
Absolutely. I think this also helps our learners because they know that this is not our first language. They know that we did not grow up living, breathing all of this social media. So when they see us take that risk, it's just another way for us to connect with them and say, look, I'm putting myself out there, so thank you so much for putting yourself out there too. Absolutely.
Good morning. Good morning. We have maybe about 15 minutes and then we'll take a break, so just in case you're getting a little antsy. One of the things that came up in that last little bit was, where does this fit in, I think, to the research process? And I would say that what my students do is just part of a larger picture. So it's not just that tweet that day, but how does that go into their continuing research? Arthur Appleby talked about curricular conversations, that those classrooms where things are taken up throughout the year, these themes persist, are actually pretty effective classrooms. And so sometimes I get people who will look at a tweet that my students do and they'll say, look at all the mistakes, look at, LOL and that kind of thing. And I think that it's part of their academic growth that they're documenting in a public way what they're researching. And it's important for them to see that as just part of a larger research approach. Okay? So this would be how it would look in our classes. So as Matt pointed out, we would review the do now together, and then we would have students search the hashtag do now wages on Twitter. or we would have them read the comments that are already in the blog. And so I think a part of this that's really important, and you started to figure it out, someone said, I think Elise, that we wanted to find out more information before we form our response, that it's important for them to find research to do reading, I think, before they write. It's great to get your voice out there, but for me, I read a lot of bad stuff from my students, not as much as I used to, but right, so that we want them to actually be a little bit more informed before they publish their stuff, even if it's a process and it's just kind of rough drafts along the way. So it begins with reading, for me. And so then they can join the conversation when I think they have some good things to say. So there it is. If you want to search, if you can get Twitter, if you follow the hashtag #DoNowWages, you'll see things popping up as we speak because Janelle's students are in school. Mine are on spring
They're
break.
also using our hashtag for this meeting. So if you guys see some littles, well, they're not littles, they're freshmen, but they're posting all actually to the prompt right now, so you guys can call it out.
Okay, so let's just take a look at it. And this is one of those things where there's no way we can prepare in advance to look at the discourse of what's going on due now this week. So when we said let's plan this session, it was just emergent, right? So whatever is going to happen here, hopefully it's good, but this is what's happening right now. So we thought we might examine some of the discourse. I spent a lot of time examining my students' discourse because I want to know what the effective writers do and how they do that, the effective communicators. So I'm always deconstructing their messages and that kind of thing. So if we were to look at the tweets that are happening right now, we'll see a couple of things. And I'm trying to make it big enough so you can see it. I think the raises are raised, then it should be done regionally through the country. But notice we've got a little link to a resource here, and I think this was what Elise was mentioning earlier, and Matt mentioned too, that, okay, my tweet is going to bring you to some information that I think is important for you. So part of the conversation is, for my students and all of our students, is if you're going to enter the conversation, maybe bring some good things to the conversation. So a lot of these tweets you'll see have links to the sources. So as a writer, as the ethos of the writer, we can judge their credibility. Is this someone we believe? Is this someone who has our trust? And so linking to the sources is a huge part of what I do, and you'll see that in the blog post that happens to be at the top today too. So that was the first tweet I noticed. Second one. I think minimum wage should rise because there are people out there working a couple of jobs to support their family. Okay, so part of it is I'm just getting my thoughts out there, right? We could say, wait a second, there's a misspelling and that kind of thing, but part of this is social scholarship. If I'm going to enter the conversation, I need to make my thoughts visible to others, and that helps me as a thinker, it helps me as a writer. I think a big problem with the discourse that we have now is that we're convinced that we're right, that we have all the facts, and everybody else is wrong. So as part of social scholarship, I've got to make my thinking and my sources visible. I want to go down to one that looks a little bit different. Okay, so here's one that you see that says view summary. I think the minimum wage is increased. It could have gone long-term. It could have long-term negative effects. KSL.com. So I don't know who Michael is. Is that one of your students? No? Because it's actually my local TV station, but it's not one of my students as the source. Okay, so again, if I click on the view summary, the source actually pops up as part of the tweet. Was what I wanted to show. Okay? So sometimes on the tweets you'll see view the summary and there's more to the tweet there. So it's not just those few characters. There can be other things that are embedded in the tweet itself. And then there's one other thing. Sometimes we'll see, there's a view photo. So she is going to, Rachel Prince is one of yours, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Janelle's student right now in Texas, tweeting a half hour ago. So, did you have a sub, or are these kids just on there?
Oh, no, because I have a co-teacher.
Okay.
But if you look at the picture, someone mentioned production. My kids actually did infographics, and so if you see a picture, that's the infographic representing their argument.
Yeah, and Janelle's going to say more about the infographic. They do amazing work with InDesign, right?
No, most of them use Illustrator, but I think that's
Or
what
Illustrator,
I'm
yeah, Illustrator. Okay. And then there was one thing I wanted to show, and that is right down. Here. You'll see this says "View Conversation." And this is where things start to get interesting, I think. In the conversation, in this case, it's Matt, right? Is that you? Or somebody at KQED. Pushing the students' thinking. Right? Or are they responding to that?
I think that's the original question.
Okay, so they're responding to that. But you can see where the longer this goes on, the more conversation that's going to happen, and I think that's where things start to get interesting. So just in that little Twitter stream, I think we see a couple of things. Well, what do you notice? From what I just showed, what does that say about students' literacy practices when they're using just this hashtag? There's a lot of participation going on. I think the level of participation, there's not a high barrier. Well, once you're connected, there's not a high barrier.
Most of them are on topic, demonstrating on topic.
Right, so a lot of the complaints that we hear about students is, oh, Twitter, they'll just say what they had for lunch, or they'll do bad things and get in trouble. But really, you do notice that this conversation is on topic because of the structure of the hashtag. I wouldn't put something off topic and then put a hashtag, do now wages, if it was just a little shout out to my friend in class or that kind of thing. So the conversation is pretty on task. Okay, so let's take a look. Yeah. Okay. So then there's also the blog posts, and there's the question here that says, you can either, this is the options students have, to respond to the do now, you can comment below or tweet your response. Be sure to begin your tweet with @KQED EdSpace and end it with do now wages. That's so it can be aggregated, for example, on this page. So we can see that one that we were just looking at of Janelle's student. That's on the Do Now page in the Twitter feed on the right-hand side there. So that's a way to organize the conversation. Again, KQED is organizing it, has a little space there. So my students, when they do their tweet, they'll see it on that page too, which is, I think, it's engaging for them. Okay, so again, we didn't know what would be here. So I'm glad the conversation was on topic with Twitter. Because, there's nothing like just doing a presentation and not knowing what's going to happen. Right? Yes?
I have a question about when you didn't know how the conversation was going to be going. Two questions. And again, very conservative area where there's a lot of resistance to devices. And did you have to get parental permission for the students to have a Twitter account?
Right. This is a new media class. On the beginning of the school year, I got permission to do any kind of experiments as possible.
And I like that. And do you ever have outside people coming in and commenting, or I'm not on Twitter. I did sign up, and my first experience was horrifying. On the first day I had a Twitter account, I closed it down immediately because of the horrible stuff that was suddenly coming into my Twitter feed, and it scared me, and I stopped using it. Do you ever have people just breaking into your conversations, or does the hashtag monitor the conversation? I don't know about Twitter.
Yeah, Matt, you can probably speak to it too, but as a teacher, I also helped do this site called youthvoices.net. And in both cases, you'd have to be, I think, pretty crazy to want to do something in a place that's monitored by classroom teachers.
Okay.
And so we don't get a lot of, because people do worry, there's some serious consideration about young people in social spaces, and we all have heard those things. But no, I don't really get that.
I have one learner whose parents didn't want her to do social media, so she just participates on the discussion board and can fulfill her
Because that's a
requirements.
closed opportunity.
Right. They okayed that, but not the Twitter.
Yeah, and I give students the choice.
Okay.
Every day I say, do you want to tweet or do you want to blog?
Okay, so they have opportunities.
There are also some teachers who teach in middle school who want to participate will have a class Twitter account, and then they kind of the students sort of together decide which ideas which ideas could be represented for that class Twitter account. So it's more kind of
And I think it's also important to note that students will monitor themselves and call each other out when the norms of that community are broken. So the norms that are set within the four walls, or not even norms, but just like community like beliefs and how you build community continues on into the online space. But again, I think if there is ever a breach in that, I think it's actually a moment to have that conversation individually with student and as a community and like realign and recalibrate that space.
And that's an important conversation, just in general.
Yeah.
So
And they're already participating in these spaces, whether we're acknowledging that in the classroom or not.
In the interest of time, we were thinking we'd take a break at the hour. And so let me just say that this is a student of mine. If you read it, you'd think, wow, great person. And you'd be right. But, it shows rational conversation about controversial topics is what you see, I think, a hallmark of this kind of our work here. So I'm going to wrap up here, so I just want to ground it in a little bit of research before we go on a break, because there's been research on classroom discussion before there was the internet, and I think some of the things that we learned pre-internet, what I did before I taught using the internet, which was like a couple decades, is still true. And one of the things was Nystrand did this study where he went to classes that were considered successful classrooms. And he started observing them. And the thing he noticed was not so much the questions teachers asked, but the questions that they followed up with. And so Arthur Appleby called that discussion-based classroom, and this was one of the studies that cited that really kind of struck home with me. Classroom discussion activities significantly related to spring performance on a state writing assessment when things like this happen. Authentic questions that explore differing understandings rather than to test students. Courtney Kazan called that the initiation response thing. So I would ask you a question, you'd give me the answer, I'd say yes or no. Okay, so not that. This is a different kind of thing where we're exploring, our questions are exploring different understandings. There's more whole class discourse devoted to free exchange of ideas among students, so that if you were to map out the discussion in the classroom, it would be a lot like here, where you said something back to you, to you, to you, and not me out to you and back to me, okay? So there's more whole class discourse, and I think you see that in both the Twitter and the blog posts. And then there's more uptake in traditional classrooms where students took the topic and ran with it, and the teacher all of a sudden was just maybe facilitating but not the driver of the conversation when they built on students' previous comment, which, this was before what we just saw, right? And they're literally building on each other's comments in these social spaces. Seems consistent with what's happening and why I think that works for me as a teacher. And then later people have looked at social network kinds of theories and participation patterns. And there was this one, and this is my last one. Sorry, I can't help myself. But, I mentioned it earlier, but Zoo looked at interaction patterns, and the one on the left is like the initiation response. This is physically, mapping out the conversation online. Okay, and it was very star-shaped, I guess, that's the name. I think like spokes on a wheel, but she said star. And what she found was, that's great. It generally, it generated information exchange, which is good. But she also noticed that in classes that were more like the group discussion we just had, the one on the right, which she refers to as a web-type interaction, she said, what I noticed about those things was not only the shape of the discourse, but that the students negotiated, debated, and defended their own positions on various issues and discussed with people of opposite opinions in a respectful and civilized manner rather than to seek a right answer. So 2 studies, one of, actually a meta-analysis of 100 classrooms that were before the internet, and this one looking at interaction patterns online, both show the same thing, that those discussion patterns that we're seeing on KQED, Twitter, or on the blog posts seem to be consistent with the research that I found on both types of classes.
Before we begin, we're going to jump into a nice panel discussion. But beforehand, I just wanted to quickly give a shout out to Allison McCarthy, who's here from PBS NewsHour Extra. PBS NewsHour Extra is a part of it. Allison writes a monthly, one post a month in Civics, which is incredible support in this work. There's also some postcards that are floating around on the tables for Do Now, for PBS NewsHour, and for a youth media festival that KQED is a part of in collaboration with the Hive Learning Network and the SF Hive, called BAMFest, which is an international youth media festival where young people can submit videos that they've produced. And the call for entries is now open, and it goes until August. And there's a website and there's guidelines. I'm not going to get into too much details about it, but check it out and share it with students making really great media, digital media videos. Please have them submit to that. Okay, so I'm going to begin the panel. I'm going to first introduce Janelle Benz from New Tech High at Capel. Just going to do a little introduction.
Okay, so many of you have asked about our learning context. I do teach in a suburb. It's a new tech, part of the New Tech Network. We do all project-based learning, so how we fit it into our daily curriculum looks a little bit different. We have one-to-one MacBook Pros, Wi-Fi, I don't know, hashtag spoiled, okay. And we have small choice school. So I actually teach 9th graders. I have 93 9th graders, and I teach in a blended humanities course. So I have a co-teacher. There's 2 teachers in the room. Myself for English 1, part of global issues, and then Mrs. Boyd, who does the world geography portion. So if you look, so when we're doing, for example, last year we did the immigration Do Now. We had to frame it with an essential question and a problem statement, the driving question and problem statement for our project. And that's how we kind of launched it. We launched it with an authentic task, which is the next slide. And we always try to tie the Do Nows to either a scaffolding activity for our projects, or this was actually, so in this case it was a scaffolding activity. The Do Now was they had to actually make a film for a Media That Matters film festival on immigration reform. And so we did the Do Now discussion as a scaffolding activity so they could see both sides. And there's some various projects that we've done. We've done a Global Issues Summit. We had a poetry slam, slamming for a cause, and we did an Olympic Challenge myth mashup with the Do Now Olympics that happened in February.
Thank you. And we have Meenu Rami from Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia.
Sure.
Hi everyone. I teach my students English at the Science Leadership Academy. We're a small public magnet high school within the school district of Philadelphia. We also have one-to-one laptop access, Macs, and now Chromebooks. And we're project-based, inquiry-driven high school. And so I'm sort of the newbie to the Do Now fund. So this past year, during the first quarter, my students took on the inquiry of is college worth the cost and debt? And they broke up into small groups and took on different angles into this question. So they looked into questions like, how do we get more women involved in STEM majors and career? Why is higher education so expensive? What is the true purpose of college? And are you really doomed if you major in humanities? Then they went out into the community and did authentic research, asking questions to people ranging from Penn professors who are down the street from us, to researchers, parents, their teachers, and even like the lady next door to them. Then they turned these interviews into different pieces of media where they use Popcorn Maker or Vimeo and really cool stuff, and sort of shared what they learned by taking on this authentic inquiry. The cool part really happened after the pieces were produced, because in a moment Chris will share, Chris's class in Utah, I'm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, took our pieces and remixed them even more. So my kids were remixing to begin with, where they were embedding data, images, interviews, and they were doing remixing within the original pieces, but then our remixes got even more remixed. And it was really cool to connect with another classroom across the country and see what writing looks like, and I'm hoping that I'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit later.
And we have Chris Sloan from Judge Memorial High School in Salt Lake City, Utah.
So I teach at a Catholic high school in Salt Lake City, Utah. And, I'm not from there. I'm from around Chicago, and I was surprised, different types of people there. But I had these preconceptions. It's a very conservative state, so when you talked about your conservative state, I could relate to that with some of my meetings yesterday. We had some good talk though. I teach in a classroom, because I do media, we have, I learned that if you produce media and sell it to people, you can actually make some money, especially at times around like graduation, things like that. So it's a mix of a sweatshop and a classroom. And so I've been able to purchase equipment that way, so really it wasn't given to me. So I have a mixture of desktop computers and then iPads as well. The class that we produce this in is the new media class, and my school is about 750 students. I teach AP English language, photography, and new media, so it's just a joy every day. So let's go to the first little, so the first question that we came up with is, how does Do Now help promote civic engagement? I think that's a big question for our students today. And I think it's appropriate, like Paul mentioned in the beginning, it's appropriate to think about it here on this place. I mean, every building is built out of rationality. And there's such a history of public civic discourse. It doesn't always have to be nice, but it has to be civic and civil in the sense that let's try to solve problems. And what my students notice is that they can argue a lot more effectively than the adults that they are reading about in their research. And I don't have to tell you that my generation, the generation right below me, are failing our students when we talk about how to solve problems constructively. And I do have hope that our students will do it better. And especially in my talk with Representative Matheson yesterday, they all know how important it is to have civic dialogue. And again, you don't have to like each other, you don't have to be nice, but it's really important that we talk about facts. and not what I think are facts. Right, so but last year my students did a thing on gun control, which is polarizing debate. And so we did the educator guide from KQED with another teacher in Sacramento. And put together a nice set of resources for trying to look at that issue rationally from both sides. And again, I teach in a school that there were hunters in my class, and there were Second Amendment advocates, and there were also people who are just anti any gun. So the educator guide is good. There's a link there. I think it is a helpful resource for people doing it. But and that's on the lowdown. But I'll show you just, oh, did you want to say?
I was just going to say the lowdown is a news education blog that KQED produces, and oftentimes we link to the resources for our new now prompts. So it has more extensive, deeper dive sort of investigation into these issues for students to explore.
Yeah, so again, that fits into our research paradigm that they do a lot of reading, and it's great to have these media professionals put together objective packages of information about these controversial topics. So, you know, there's an example of a student's tweet who brought us to her her YouTube video. And yeah, so the YouTube video is we can play maybe just the first 20 seconds.
Dear elected leaders, with the recent dialogue about gun control and gun violence, our generation has something to say.
Since 1968, over 1 million people have been killed by firearms in the U.S.
In the United States, one person is shot every 17 minutes by a firearm.
According to the Center for Disease Control, more people die each year falling out of bed than from assault rifles.
72% of gun murders are committed by handguns, while only 4% are committed by assault rifles. This stresses the importance of background checks, so less people can get their hands on guns at all.
One possible solution to gun violence in America could be to have universal, federally run background checks, which are mandatory for anyone buying any sort of firearm.
With strict gun laws, someone somewhere will always be able to get around the rule. But if we go to the root of the issue, educate others, provide long-term care and insurance coverage for people suffering from mental illness, as well as greater incentives for the men and women that treat them, we can restrict psychotic breaks before restricting gun laws.
Okay. So, you know, that last student actually, that's an example of research that took place over the year. Her topic in the beginning, her inquiry was schizophrenia. And the more she researched it, the more, you know, the connection between mental health and gun violence became apparent to her. And so that's an example of what I was talking about the curricular conversations, that they keep gaining depth and weight as the students go on. But the interesting thing about the YouTube video was, and we get back to civil discourse, I think part of civil discourse is not always the end result. You know, like I wish I had lots of stories of students that rallied around you know, their tweets and brought significant change to our community. But I think a big part of civil discourse is understanding the issues first. Because, you know, you can get together and you can put out all kinds of stuff on Twitter, but I think the important thing is to do research first before you get there. So I view these as important steps to civic discourse, but I have some examples of students who, you know, did amazing grassroots stuff. But in general, I think the first step is they should understand the issues very well. So the YouTube video, go back one, sorry. You know, you put something on YouTube about a controversial issue, and the trolls come out. So the comments, if you have that and you go look at those comments, they are not nice. They are vicious comments that, you know, like these students, their idea was, we just want to put together a video that represents our class's ideas on the topic. They were just ripped to shreds by people with anonymous names, you know, crude names, and the students came in the next day and they said, have you seen the comments on our video? And so we pulled them up and we read them. And they were really just vitriolic and mean-spirited and also ignorant. So we had this discussion, should we delete this stuff? Because that's not they're saying, and they unanimously said, no, let's let it stand, because that's a great record of how you don't talk to people about controversial issues. So, you know, take a look at those things. And I thought that the reaction, I thought honestly that they were going to say, we need to get rid of some of these things because we own the video, we can delete those comments. And they said, no, let's let them stand. So, again, I think an important part of civic discourse is understanding others' points of view, even when you really, really don't like those others' points of view, and you let it stand. So the next example, and then I'll pass on. A girl, a pair of them, interviewed people who actually work with guns, like their job requires them to have guns. So that was their angle for the story. And they interviewed a chief of police and our school resource officer. And then this is a SoundCloud file, so this is how we do podcasts.
State flower, the Sago lily, state bird, the California seagull, state firearm, the Browning M1911 semi-automatic pistol, almost the same exact gun used to shoot Gabby Giffords in the Arizona shooting in 2011. I'm Abby McGill.
And I'm Jackie Morgan. As high school students, we set out to acquire more knowledge on the national epidemic of gun control debates. We wanted to hear the opinions of individuals who have experience and training with guns.
Jackie and I sat down with Chief Chris Bertram, Chief of the Sheriff's Department of Holiday in Utah.
Okay, so I like the angle of the story, actually restricting our conversation to people who actually have to have guns and what is their opinion on gun control. And I like how the opening was engaging. The state gun, you know, they did that through research. They also, through research, they found that that was coincidentally the gun that was used to shoot Gabby Giffords. So there was that topical tie-in to, at the time, last spring, was that case was a big part of the gun control debate. So a couple examples of, I think, how students, the important part of civic discourse is being knowledgeable about the issues, then maybe thinking about how to advocate for them.
Thank you, Chris. Minu is going to talk about the question, answer the question, respond to. What is writing today?
Could we actually show the piece that you
Of course.
For this project, our group focused on the central question, is college worth the cost and debt, through the viewpoint of the employability of different majors. We interviewed some experts on education within our school to see what they thought about this topic.
My name is Chris Lehman. I'm the founding principal of the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I went to the University of Pennsylvania and I majored in English with a concentration in 20th century American English literature. Well, the funny thing is that, you know, everybody said to me when I was in college, oh, you're an English major, what do you want to do, be a teacher? And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And of course, I ended up doing that several years later. You know, at the time, I majored in English because it was my favorite subject in high school, and one of my high school teachers said to me, undergraduate is the last time in your life where you can study what you want to study for the sake of studying it. And I couldn't think of a better way to spend 4 years than read good books and talk. I worried about what I was going to find a job in. I was worried that being an English major that was a concern. You know, not living on your own, not having your mom or your dad look over your shoulder and be like, is your homework done, is your homework done, is your homework done? You know, and then for me, I think the wonderful thing about when I was at Penn is I just really felt like I developed as a critical thinker. And I think that I think that there are some majors that do that better than others. I think that's one of the wonderful things about being an English major, is it really taught me how to think, how to write and convey my ideas really powerfully. The fascinating thing about college is that, for some kids who kind of don't take it super seriously, college is kind of just an extension of high school. It's just 4 more years of this thing you do. I think for other kids who throw themselves into what a college has to offer them is this incredibly intense academic intellectual growth and sort of emotional growth time in their lives. But like anything else, it's kind of, you get out what you put in. I think if kids are ready to take themselves to sort of make that next leap.
Thank you. Thank you for giving that your attention for a few moments. The student goes on to find other role models and resources within the community and continues to explore the question, is college worth the cost and the debt? So what is writing today is the question that I'm responding to, but I want to step back and think about what is my responsibility as an educator. And I think one of the things that I deeply believe is that my responsibility is to leave my students more curious and more courageous after I've met them and have worked with them for a year. It's a privilege to spend 180 or more days with them, but what is the outcome of that? And then when I think about the content and the standards and how they're going to be evaluated and how I'm going to be evaluated, I'm thinking about basic skills like research, analysis, being able to synthesize things, being able to reflect, being able to produce new knowledge, and then find ways to share that knowledge. Those are the skills that I'm going after. And I can't think of a better way than to take on things like Do Now and to take part in a communal conversation around these ideas. I think it's important that my students, my kids take on questions that are rich and deep and difficult. They have an iPhone or another phone in their pocket that can answer almost any question that they may have during my class. So what are the questions that are worth going after as a community? Especially having access to connectivity and to being able to produce this type of resource. I think it's really important that I think about, how can I leverage their personal interests, their personal investments, and their personal inquiries, and then tie it back to the skills. So I mean, you're all brilliant, I don't need to mention it, but even in that 2 minute that you gave your attention to, and thank you for doing so, you can see that the student had to think about questions and the order of questions and who to go after, and to try to get Lehman to sit down for a few minutes, she probably had to go 3 times and be resilient and keep doing that. So how do you plan a story? What does the order of the story look like? Who is the audience? What is the message? And what's the best way to articulate that message? These are the questions that we grapple with every day in my classroom, in our classroom. And it's amazing to come across opportunities like Do Now, where my kids can jump in and dive in and get excited. But then as an English teacher, I can still tie it back to the skills that, what my parents would want me to teach, what my administrator would want me to address, what my state, and frankly, what my country and my society expects me to do to prepare my students to be critical thinkers, producers in this society.
Thank you, Mina. So Janelle is going to discuss a little bit about this question of how does Do Now reflect the connected learning principles in action. We've heard this idea come around a lot. Perhaps you've heard this throughout this week, this idea of connected learning. So Janelle will provide a little bit of a framework of what that is and how Do Now applies to that.
So I think that connected learning is, it's an approach, it's an approach that embraces principles that we all can embrace and champion. Particularly, it's founded on things by educational philosophers like John Dewey. It's been extensively researched and explored by the MacArthur Foundation's Digital Media and Learning. And the 6 principles are these, in the next slide, that connected learning happens anywhere, in any context. If it's interest-driven, if it's peer supported, if it's academically oriented, production centered, openly networked, and focused on a shared purpose. For those of you who would like to find out more, you can download the ebook, Teaching in the Connected Learning Classroom. The link is provided. So Do Now is interest driven. First of all, the topics are very timely, and they're topics that if it's not impacting them now, they can see how that will impact them in the future. Also, our kids are getting their choice in digital projects to represent their writing, their thinking, and their informed opinions on these various topics. I know that one of the Do Nows this past fall semester was on Malala, and that was a really pivotal, unforgettable highlight of the first semester for many of my learners. The notion of someone being shot because she wanted to be educated really spoke to them and made them not only think about, wow, there are people out there my age who are making a difference, but I need to not take this for granted. And that was voiced in several of the reflections. Also, the learners drive the discussion in the Do Now, so that really helps to boost their interest and their accountability to contributing. Some of the various media that my kids have actually created, they've done movies, they've done memes, infographics, zigas, posters, Vogies, Prezzies. They've done lots of that. Here's an example, which I think is interesting. So infographics, there are a lot of free sites that kids can go onto and do a drag and drop, so they don't have to have access to the programs to do so. But my kids were like, no, we can't take a shortcut here. It's easy, let's just do it on Illustrator. So this was actually in conjunction with the Do Now Egypt project topic. My kids were trying to figure out, we actually did it in conjunction, this is when we did our summit, and they had to adopt a country. And so each of them adopted a country and they had to do an infographic on various facts about the country. And then they weighed in on the Syria topic and also on Egypt, what that country's perspective would be. And then there's an additional example. I just love them, I think they're so talented. And then, let's see, a meme for the next one. I think memes are so interesting because for our kids, they just think it's funny, but we have to temper it with like, how can you also be informative about a topic? This was actually an invitation to reflect on the Do Now experience. And so this is what one of my kids made. So you're telling me that doing multimedia projects have helped Barrett present his projects in creative and fun ways? So it's you can see how that would be interesting because these are images that they use all the time and they see in memes to be funny. And so they like, oh yeah, I used, whiny baby, or I used angry such and such, or I used happy bear, whatever picture they're using. And then for them to be able to connect that to their own learning or reflection on a topic or even their own experience is very empowering. It really helps to connect to the learners. Do Now activities are also peer supported. We have questions from learners, and I'll show those to you, that they are seeking more information on the research, on the sources, on the bias, on the objectivity of whatever sources or products that are being made. We see on the discussion board that the strain really is allowing them to see how thoughts are being formulated, how discussions are being developed, and they're making literal addresses to, hey, Mr. whatever, or hey, Rachel, or hey, and they're questioning them. So it's not us, it's not the facilitators, not the teachers going on, but they are asking those probing questions. They are furthering the discussion. They're asking for more input. And that's really important and empowering to see the learners doing that themselves, because really that's what it's all about. Also this year, for Do Now, Chris and I are mentoring newbies to the Do Now project, so in that professional-wise, we are supporting our peers and colleagues. And a lot of my learners feel such huge accountability to their peers versus teachers to respond, that they are constantly looking at their phone and saying, oh my gosh, why is everybody tweeting me? Why are they replying to my tweet? But it's very motivating to them because they feel like, hey, if they're asking for help or they're asking for clarification, I'm going to go ahead and do it because that's my peer. It's kind of a different type of accountability. Do Now is academically oriented. I have rubrics for each of the discussions. I embed standardized skills from the state. We revisit expectations, not only to clarify them, but we have found in our classroom, and I think this is something that's true through the whole cohort that's doing this year, we have seen great development, and we're asking them more and more and more to do more because they're becoming so good at this platform, these two platforms of Twitter and the discussion board. We can continue to add expectations and requirements and fine-tune the rubrics. Before the beginning of the year, they were making comments, like they were just having a discussion or a more social kind of discourse. And now you see evidence and support with practically every tweet, every comment. And that's a big step in having that really important critical discourse in the academic context. Okay. Do Now is also production centered. We'll see more various digital products. And we're seeing also that evidence isn't just from the text. Evidence can be what the learner or the student creates as a reflection of their thinking. So now they're making representations, digital representations of their thoughts, not only articulating it writing, but also articulating it with the products, Zigas, things like that. Here is one video response to Do Now. Free choice to be able to choose how they represent their thinking. She also did the tweets and things like that, but she took it the extra step to do a video response. And then we're also looking at the various talents of our learners. Here's a Ziga. If you guys don't know what a Ziga is, this is what it is. So they can take still photos or they can take GIFs and then overlay music and their text to express their, or respond to any prompt. Do Now is also openly networked. As a teacher, I can go in and weigh in on certain topics, or I can ask another question, or if I find that a learner is not really pushing himself or herself, I can refine the question or push his or her thinking. So that's nice to be able to discuss, no matter who you are, with the learners. And we're seeing the changes in the types of networks because of this. And plus they're able to share, publish, perform, and have their writing actually presented to a wider audience, and that is very motivating for our learners. We did a Do Now Crime, which was about urban violence, and I live in the I work in the suburbs, and it's not really a big issue for them. I mean, they can leave their bike there unlocked. So for them to have the opportunity to research and understand this gravity of the situation in the big cities is a huge thing. And one of our learners, slam poem responses. So she wrote a slam poem in response using resources on the Do Now, and she recorded it on SoundCloud.
This life is a sentence, a death sentence. Innocent behind bars, guilty on the street. Find bullets have become the epithet of our presence. Load the ammo, aim the barrel, pull the trigger. One dead, 9 bullets to go. We keep count. Number of victims annually, 100,000. Number of deaths annually, 30,000. The word approximately is strategically placed before each number. Leeway given for addition or subtraction, but we all know 30,000 will turn into 40,000, then 50, 60, 70, 80, continuing to rise.
All right. So it's not only expository writing that they're able to use, we can also use various genres because of the Do Now discussions. Do Now is also focused on shared purpose. For us, global citizenship is the common thread that we find in all of these activities, and that's what kind of keeps us together as far as our purpose of doing Do Nows.
Great, thank you. So we're going to open up to question and answers. You guys have any thoughts on or questions about what we've talked about thus far in the panel? We have a lot of other issues we can discuss, but I think in terms of time, we only have about 30 minutes.
So I know you guys do this, so I just would kind of like to hear your thinking about how you structure this in your classroom, how you balance the topic, how you balance like student inquiry about things that they're genuinely interested in with the very topic-driven Do Now. Like, is there space in your classrooms for both, and how do you structure that?
So when I got a chance to take part and connect with Chris, and Chris served as my mentor as I tried to implement Do Now in my classroom. We were in a Google Hangout, and the upcoming topics were shared, and this question about college being worth the cost and the debt came up, and I teach 11th graders who are very aware of this on the horizon, and I jumped at it and I said, I think my students and I would like to investigate this. So I think there is a balance, but I think there's also an opportunity to get kids to think about things like Egypt that they may not, it may not connect to their, personal experience at the moment, but still allows them to take part in a civic discussion that may not immediately serve their purpose or what's on their mind. So I think it's a balance of both is how I see it, but maybe other panelists have other responses.
So, my students, I try to have them do kind of long-range research. So how does this pop up? How do I work that into the classroom? It can be a pretty low commitment for them. So a lot of times I'll start and show the video, and it's just completely out of the blue. But most of these kids bring some kind of curiosity or knowledge to it already. And so they don't come at it completely dry. But every once in a while what happens is they'll take up one of these Do Nows as their long-range story. So in the new media class, they're producing documentaries basically through the medium that works most appropriately. So a lot of times they'll, like the Do Now, I'll notice will come up maybe a couple weeks or a month later, and they'll have this background in it, and that kind of manifests itself in their inquiry because it's on the back burner. So it seems to work out well, although there are times when my students, I think, are just like, do not do another thing. Do not show us some new app or something today. We just want to do press a little bit. So there is times where I have to hold back a little bit. You mentioned so many things, Ziga, visually or whatever, all those things, and sometimes I get a read for the students that there can be too much. But the do now is the level of commitment where all I have to do is do some reading, make a comment. That's doable for kids in the classroom, just in one session, easily in one class setting. So some of them can do as few as 10 minutes. Yeah.
One thing I also wanted to just note is that with the do now question, I really find it valuable for teachers to be very liberal with that question and think about the learning goals for that week and perhaps mash up the question and the issue with what's being learned. So for example, if you're an ELA teacher and you're studying, your students are reading To Kill a Mockingbird, or even something that's not so dead on to perhaps the topic that comes up, to sort of think about the world of the book or the character, and think how that process the issue through that lens perhaps, and really take liberty to be creative and even a little bit nonsensical or bizarre with that kind of application.
I have one thing to add, sorry. We were talking about this just a second ago, actually, and think of the do now this week, minimum wage. All the things we teach, is poverty not an issue in many literature that we teach or the kinds of things we're doing already? So these are timeless themes a lot of times that pop up, and so it's pretty easy for me to make a pretty logical connection to the things we're reading anyway.
I would say also, as far as taking a personal inquiry, I think it's amazing how kids can look at a topic that may be national. They can turn it into a more international topic, like the idea of women's rights that we had. They started in the United States, then they started questioning what that meant, elsewhere in the world. And then ultimately, and it could be, that we're giving them a little extra time to even reflect more on it, you get those reflections of bringing it back to themselves. Well, what does that mean to me as a 14-year-old in this suburban community? And they can voice that. So it's like full circle of taking a topic that may be bigger than themselves, but really it gives them the time and it gives them the prompt to actually relate it back to themselves too.
I apologize if I missed this earlier. I have been so over the top with excitement in what you're doing. Who actually chooses the topics for, how's that selection done? And is there a place that people can make suggestions for topics?
So that's funny. Hello, test. It's funny you asked that question because the next slide talks about the schedule of Do Now, and it tells you who are the authors of the posts and who have been in the past. Every Friday we have the Civic post go up so that it can be looked at and implemented throughout the entire following week. Every Tuesday we rotate between a science topic and an arts and pop culture topic. And basically we're continually growing the source of who authors these posts. At first KQED, the education team of education content specialists in science, arts, and news would author the posts, and then we reached out to PBS NewsHour last year. Youth Radio has produced a few of those posts, Radio Rookies from WNYC. We're going to be working with Listen Edition. At recent conferences, there's been a lot of interest in wanting to sort of bring youth perspectives to not just the conversation, but to the prompts, to the actual what issues are important to discuss. In science, we have California Academy of Sciences. It's an after-school program, Science in Action, where they actually meet every week and research topics and write. The class is basically geared towards writing the posts, so it's youth-generated. We're going to be doing that with Bay Area Youth Video Coalition next fall, where they're going to be picking arts and pop culture posts. And so this idea of growing the voices of who's coming up with the topics is becoming interesting.
Remember
Yes, thank you. And then once a month, we also have the National Writing Project working group of teachers who identify one post at the end of the month that we predetermine and pre-select, so that that is known and planning can be established for students to actually make more media-rich types of projects. To post something one week and then expect a student to create a video that week is a little daunting. Any other questions?
I can shout.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to, in the production process, how expert do the teachers have to be?
Not.
Well, I mean, if you have kids who understand certain things but not other things, and I'm sure there are resources people can go to, but if you don't know all the possibilities or guidelines, how comfortable do you have to be with allowing them to explore those?
So I would refer you also to KQED Ed Space's tutorials on the various digital media production, and also say that this is another way that we are peer supported, that DoNow is peer supported, because the learners end up taking charge and teaching them and giving them tips on, well, why don't you do this, or it's the, you know, the eraser tool, or, you know, why don't you do, so they become the teachers as well, and we can learn from them. It's really about taking that risk, and it's amazing. They've exceeded expectations more than have underwhelmed, for sure.
Any other questions?
How do you deal with copyrighted material in student productions if it's going out on the web for others to see?
Wow. There is the 1976 Fair Use Clause of the copyright law, which I invoke frequently. Because my students will sample things from, you know, they'll take pieces of popular culture as part of their video. And it all boils down, in my mind, it boils down to transformative use. We're not repackaging a music video. We might select a portion of it to show, you know, exploitation of women. And I think we're transforming that, right? It's because then it turns into this persuasive piece that's academically oriented. And it's not the original, so it is transformed to use. So that's always my go-to, because we need to use it more often. That we do have a fair use clause that we under-exercise, I think, as teachers, because we're afraid of copyright, because we've heard all these bad things about teachers somewhere who violated copyright and then had all their dittos confiscated.
We posted, Center for Social Media and Learning at American University has amazing resources on fair use. And we have a post on our website that talks about that, some videos about fair use. So there's a lot there. It might make the issue more complex. It doesn't necessarily elucidate anything. It's pretty complicated. But anyhow, those are definitely things to look at. Yes?
Just a quick shout out to the Digital Is, MWE's Digital Is site. Also has lots of materials on copyright and fair use, many of them made by your colleagues.
Any other questions? Maybe like one or two more.
Just sort of tech question. Is the site at all embeddable? I can think about some of the teacher ed online courses. I know, but this is just a question about whether or not the site is embeddable and can be used to teach teachers in that way, to be accessed on an LMS. So.
Well, it's all open and free, so you can take the links. You can repurpose, reuse, definitely. I'm not sure if that answers. You can't like. I mean, you have to. All our information is on the website, and all our media is we're embedding from other sources as well, so you can reconstruct perhaps. Yeah, there's no like easy kind of application that would allow you to embed it into an LMS. Yes.
I was thinking along the same lines and thinking how interesting it would be in a pre-service or graduate course to ask students to do an infographic on the relationship between do now and what they know and believe about learning theory and research and literacy teaching and how it maps on to do now, because obviously I've already communicated this. I think it's just right with wonderful realizations of what we believe about literacy.
Yes.
Can you give any examples of what's worked or hasn't worked about trying to collaborate with other teachers in your building?
Oh, in your building, okay. I was thinking a little
Yeah, your building.
broader. Teachers in your building. Okay, can I start with a wider network first and then move down? Because what I've learned about is how networks communicate to networks. And I think that's a real salient point for all of us here as we start to change, adapt as a network. You know, how do we connect with other networks like this amazing KQED network that's around the country with National Writing Project and other things? I mean, my short answer is I have to be more transparent as a teacher. Like, I have to be able to communicate more with other people and plan more with other people than I ever have. And so, to me, that's a huge lesson for the writing project, that in order to survive, we've got to connect almost like a covalent bond, you know, in chemistry to other networks. It gets stronger. We share electrons, you know. But that's a wider thing, so maybe closer about in the school.
So when I did a similar activity with the teachers on my campus with using social media, one of the things that they said was, oh, well, I wouldn't feel comfortable discussing these controversial topics in a wider venue. I think that the learners would feel safer in the confines of four walls, and I get that. I mean, I get that we want to be there, we want them to be comfortable, but I think that there are also things, I don't know if you could show slide 90. Slide 90. I think that this is a really good tip of why we would do it, and this is one of the things that I showed her. Well, this is why you get them out there, because you may have a learner that, you know, says something like, if Martin Luther King walked in my community today, he would be satisfied that there's not much racism going on in this time, because back then people were teased for their racial background. I assume he would be elated to see people getting along with others. And then the next slide shows, people weren't teased for being black, they were persecuted and hated. And it's that idea of being transparent of what you're at, and then he proceeds to back up examples of persecution with historical events. And so I think that it's up to us as advocates on our campus to say, but look at this powerful discourse that's happening, that there's a way to respectfully disagree, there's a way to provide additional resources to young learners and say, I get what you're saying, I respectfully disagree, here's why. It goes beyond teasing. Now I also have a counterexample further on where my kid just appeared like a bigot, but he also went through the experience of, I need to really rethink that and see how I present myself to others and my views to others. And I think that's really what civic engagement is about. I think that's what being a global citizen is about, is having those opinions and realizing and understanding how you can discuss these openly, fairly, and getting that discourse going. So I think that that's, yes, I have gotten pushback from other teachers on my campus, but this is what I show them to help to persuade them otherwise.
I'm wondering if all the students respond to the prompts, and if so, how do you know?
All right, so all of our students do. If they don't, then it is an assignment, and that's why if you see the hashtag BoydBens, that is our hashtag from our class. And then on the discussion board also, it says boy events. It's a way to kind of track them. Like I said, we actually do have rubrics for this because it aligns with our state standards of being able to have a piece of statement, state an argument, provide support or evidence, and discuss that and actually continue that throughout a discussion. And so that's how we grade it, that's how we track it. I urge you to use that hashtag because it kind of ends up being a badge of real solidarity, and our kids use our class hashtag now for other things. It's really helped the community of our class.
Boy, that's good.
I had more of a comment that I'd like to see this angle towards English language learners, because this is very positive for them in many ways. I teach English language learners, so this is my soapbox. In many ways, they can be marginalized in that they're consumers of the media, but they don't understand how to produce. And in this way, they have a voice, and they're not immediately criticized for their fluency. And once they start to be confident with that voice, then they start to move towards those more challenging forms that you were showing, and they will do that. So I'd love to see a little bit of an angle of, and this is also great for English language learners, because often we need to think, until they're fluent, we're not going to get them on.
I think that's an excellent point, and I was also thinking as far as collaborating with other people on your campus, what if you actually took that and supported them in their whatever language that they're in a foreign language, or even with one of the multimedia classes, and you got them to produce a piece or response in their home language, and then you took that piece and you also did it in your English language.
Yeah, so there's an important difference, I think, between private and public writing. And so like the Korean student that I have is learning English. And so what we'll do is he'll draft a response and we'll show it on the board. And then students will say, oh, I might phrase it this way. Or, they'll point out things, and then that student revises before they do the public post. And I think that's for a lot of our reticent learners, that I think there needs to be that private space sometimes before it's public.
I think there are not just English language learners. I think there's a tension between public and private writing for all students. And I think the more we model that going public with our writing, is empowering. And somebody mentioned the power of stories and storytelling before. I think we then sort of bring that ethos and that spirit of sharing to the classroom. So I think you can't really do this work if you're not willing to do it yourself.
So we have about 15 minutes. I just wanted to go over a couple sort of other resources that we have for teachers who are interested, or site leaders who are interested in thinking about how this work can sort of live in your area and with your community. We have go back to that second. Online on the KQD site, we have this online orientation that kind of takes you through what Do Now is, how it adds value, basically a lot of what we've talked about today. There's video tutorials about Twitter, and then there's this action plan that kind of looks at these issues that are very sort of pragmatic and in terms of what potential challenges you might need to consider before implementing. And these aren't issues with that deal with equipment access, internet access, and sort of developing a strategy and roadmap to getting those things ready. Access to Twitter. We have a lot of teachers who will go over the prompt, and then students will do the responses for homework. In fact, I think there's a bunch of students, and I woke up this morning from Berkeley High School who were tweeting, which would have been around 4 in the morning, which is kind of about selfies. They're really into the selfies, pop culture posts. Alternatives to Twitter, comments, other platforms, just face-to-face, today's Meet. A lot of teachers have questions about Twitter accounts if their students are going to be joining Twitter. Should they use the Twitter account that they already have versus creating a new one for this specific project? And having that conversation with students is really interesting. Assessments, how to sort of aggregate or assess the work of your students using special hashtags, or you can also create lists on Twitter of your students. And then that first do now, like how are you going to scaffold these challenges of netiquette and digital citizenship and online safety and some of these issues that might be big in your community, how to kind of address those. We have, just talking here, we have this resource as well on the Do Now page, written in collaboration with Twitter's online safety team, that kind of are just a bunch of links to different articles on online safety, etiquette, Twitter 101, resources for parents and administrators. These are great articles that kind of look at research that show the value of social media learning, articles from that kind of interviewed people from the Department of Education talking about internet access and blocking and e-trade and dispelling some of these myths that kind of a lot of school districts and county offices of ed kind of try to put up. And other resources in digital media formats as well. So this is all on the Do Now page on the sidebar here. So the guide to using Twitter is there, and then in the About Do Now is that, it's also linked in the presentation, but the About Do Now has this orientation, online orientation that you can go through and access at the end the action plan. Sorry, I'm just going through this kind of quickly. Which kind of asks you these types of questions and how do you sort of, some of those challenges, like how are your students going to engage, what are your goals, how many classes, blah, blah, blah. And other things to consider, sort of based on a lot of what the national rights some of these teachers have presented on about building up to Twitter. Perhaps start with the comment section and then go into Twitter later. Encourage your students to revisit the discussion, that they're not just like looking at the prompt and then just putting something in the universe, but actually engaging back and forth with it. Using Twitter for your professional learning community as well. So what Nina was saying is that it's not just something that your students engage with, but you yourself engage with Twitter and how it can help your own professional learning network and see the affordances for you so that you can really sort of become an interesting point of view and perspective for your students as well. And not just stay in the dark with it. So, let's see. Do Now is free and open to any educator use any time. As far as the learning management system, if you want, I can talk through that in terms of using it for closed courses. And I also wanted to sort of give another mention to our partners on this project with PBS NewsHour Extra, Educator Innovator, the National Writing Project, of course, Youth Radio, California Academy of Sciences, Radio Rookies, and Twitter as well. I hope this has been a really meaningful and generative conversation that we're more civically engaged perhaps. And we still have about 3 minutes, so maybe if there's one more question.
Can you share the URL before?
For the presentation?
Yeah, I didn't get
yes.
it quickly enough.
I'll go back all the way to slide one in our opus. It's right there. Yes.
So, I was wondering, I appreciate all the conversation about what routinely happens when you use Do Now in your classroom, and especially the comments like that you do hear from all students. But I want to ask Chris, because Chris, you said that you had examples of times when the Do Now had mobilized students to action. And you said, so there are those fabulous examples. And I think offering one concretely sometimes moves that out of a techno-myth space. So I wonder if you might share.
Well, one, maybe it was synergetic, but or synergistic. I had some students who were deep into the Obama campaign, and I think it was, around the issue of gun control. They went out, did some door-to-door campaigning for the Obama campaign. One committed to being the volunteer coordinator for it. And so I don't know if the Do Now led to that or the Do Now fed to that, but using social platforms because they felt deeply about the presidential election last time is the one that's coming to mind right now. So, I don't know that it was a linear thing. It seemed to be more synergistic.
Any other questions? Great.
I would now like to reintroduce Mr. Paul Poe.
Great.
Great, thanks Matt, and we give a round of applause to our panel. So one quick announcement, Mina will be available afterwards if you, you'd like to have her sign copies of her book. As well, it will be possible for you to talk to any of the panelists. They're willing to stick around if you want to get started on Twitter, if you haven't already, or if you have further questions, if you want to just engage further or more deeply in what they've talked about. So they'll be available during lunch and then beyond, for at least a little while, and not forever. And I just wanted to once again thank Matt, Janelle, Minu, and Chris for such a thoughtful and provocative session. I just want to say that I, for one, am incredibly excited to mark how this work progresses over the course of through our network, which we all can do actually via Twitter. We can follow what happens on Do Now through that Twitter hashtag. So I'm really looking forward to that part. And I just wanted to thank all of you for engaging so productively in the plenary today. So thank you. Round of applause to all of you. Great, and so this marks the official end of our spring meeting. So we just wish you well in your travels home, or if you're sticking around in DC for whatever you have going on this afternoon.